Hello, and welcome to Will's Infinite Library. I'm Will, and this is my Infinite Library. You may notice there's some extra gaps on the shelf today, and that's because I've taken off some of the books I wanted to talk about today. I just want to quickly go over this small stack of books, which are some of my favorite Fabulist and magical realism books that are surreal and a little weird, but based in reality, often more kind of literary books. This is one of my favorite genres that just kind of excites me and makes me see the world differently, and that's what I love so much about it. So let's quickly just go through each of these books. I'm not going to talk a lot about them. I just want to show them off and have this list for you. So first up is Gabriel Garcia Marquez, 100 Years of Solitude. This is one of the defining works of magical realism. So it has to be on the list. It's one of the first books I read in this genre. It's just brilliant and beautiful and epic and super magical. Next up is Karente Yamashita's Through the Arc of the Rainforest, a beautiful book that is also super magical, super beautiful, and I think another kind of staple in the genre of this kind of magical realism. Next up is The Melting Queen by Bruce Cinnamon. Now we're moving to Canada, and a book I've talked about on the channel before, so I won't spend much time on it, but beautiful, beautiful book about a magical kind of alternate Edmonton, about kind of finding who you are outside of norms and expectations, and super, super imaginative. Next up is Karen Russell's St. Lucy's Home for Girls Raised by Wolves. Karen Russell is another contemporary writer who just has a brilliant imagination, and this is a short story collection, which is my favorite of all of her works. She has written a novel as well, another short story collection, maybe other things that I don't know about, but this one is really cool, really imaginative. All the stories have this kind of strong, eerie vibe to them that just makes you see things a little differently, makes things feel a little differently. It reminds me a lot of listening to like a specific album that you like and how it makes you kind of see or feel some specific mood. And this book really captures that for me. Also, I got the chance to meet her at a literary conference years ago, and she signed the book for me. Cool. Easter egg. Next up is my favorite book of all time, Jitterbug, Perfume by Tom Robbins. Another book rooted in reality, very contemporary in feel. It was written in the 80s though, so not now contemporary, but like more than a lot of the older works. I would argue that it's a classic, but maybe it needs another 10 to 20 years to be officially a classic. I don't know. But again, a great, amazing book that really dives into fantasy as well as kind of magical realism and contemporary fantasy, and all over the map, very kind of genre defying. Next up, Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World by Haruki Murakami. What to say about this book? I talked about it in one of my previous videos that I want to reread it soon, so I sadly don't remember super detailed stuff about it, but I remember loving it and it almost feeling like a dream. Like, it's very surreal, more than these other books, which I would say toe the line between magical realism, fabulism, and those kind of things. This one feels very surreal specifically. Also, St. Lucy's Home for Girls Raised by Wolves is kind of more surreal, I would say, as well. And I think that's because they're really strongly shaped by the vibe or the feeling of the work. And to me, that makes it surreal somehow. Like, there's all these disparate pieces of things that don't feel like they're necessarily rooted as deeply in our reality, but kind of an alternate reality in a way. Next up, The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. This is The Metamorphosis and other stories. The Metamorphosis is cool, but the other stories are kind of cooler to me. These older kind of tales when short stories didn't have to be realistic, but didn't have to be genre fiction either, I really love. They just feel like they're short stories that don't necessarily fit any specific genre. Sometimes they feel more like parables or more like folk tales or something, but they don't feel like genre fiction. They feel like a realistic story that has weird stuff happening that's not realistic at all. It is magical, it is fantasy, it is something else. And that's what I love about these stories. Along similar lines, let's go next to Nathaniel Hawthorne's tales. These are similar. And these are books that I read in school, both Kafka and Hawthorne's tales. which again is why I use that term tales, because they use that word rather than short stories in this era, because I don't know that they were something different, but they felt different. Like I said, they weren't really tied to a specific genre, and fiction could mean anything, right? Like nowadays fiction is such a narrow thing, and or such a broad thing, and we can narrow it down to so many subgenres. But I feel like in this era, a story was a story, fiction was fiction, and because it wasn't real, anything could happen. And so weird stuff happens, magical stuff happens, and that's just part of the story, which is why I lump it in with this fabulist kind of genre. Similarly, the short stories of Edgar Allan Poe, again, kind of towed the line for me between tales, which I think they firmly are, partly because of the era and because of what short stories were at the time that he was writing them, but also they feel very strongly like some of the more surreal things that I talked about earlier, like Karen Russell's stories, and like, what was the other one that I said? Oh, and like Murakami as well. And I think that's because the vibe is really strong. That feeling is so strong. A lot of times these kind of works can feel very conceptual and very cerebral. But these specific books that I'm just mentioning, like Karen Russell's books and Murakami and Poe, feel like they have this strong feeling to them. And specifically, I think of The Fall of the House of Usher is the story that really made Poe's stories click for me. Like I'd read The Raven and some other ones, The Telltale Heart, as a kid in school and stuff, and I liked them. But when I read The Fall of the House of Usher, I just felt this weird sense of surreal otherworldliness almost that does probably tip further to fantasy than a lot of these other books, but I think it's still very tied to this realm of fabulism. And then next up, and the last book I'm going to mention today, is Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino. I don't know if this is the best example of his work for this video specifically, but it's one that I have. I think Cosmicomics, which is one of his story collections, is more in this vein for me. And I really love Invisible Cities too. And it's kind of about visiting, I don't know, it's kind of a spoiler to say, but it's all these different perspectives of cities, and then this kind of big revelation that comes up as perspective kind of shifts. And it's just a really cool, unique perspective, but some of his other stories are more kind of magical, especially the ones in Cosmicomics really resonated with me and captured my imagination. And I think what I really love about these magical realism and fabulist books is that they really are the whole package for me in terms of what I'm looking for in literature. They are thought-provoking, engaging, they aren't afraid to take risks and try new things, and they capture my imagination and make me think and make me feel, and they just do it all, and I love them so much. So I wanted to share some of these books with you. If you have other ideas of books that would be great on this list, please let me know. I'm always looking for more recommendations. And if you've read any of these books, let me know what you thought. I'd love to hear from you. And as always, please feel free to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Thank you again so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.